Hi folks, so this is a simple video to talk about the names of the parts of swords. Okay, the common names used for various parts of swords. Hopefully it will help some viewers to get up to speed on some of my other videos where I throw in terminology without explanation. Okay, so we'll start off with the medieval sword. Here we've got the Albion Cressy from the American sword makers Albion. Nice sword. As I mentioned in another video, I'm sharpening it for a friend of mine at the moment. So, start off a fairly simple sword to name the parts. Very simply, the sword as a whole divides into two parts, the blade and the hilt. Okay, so the expression "to the hilt" means running someone right the way up to the hilt, running the blade into them, which is generally speaking not a good idea, but there are some treatises which say to do it in certain circumstances. So the hilt is this portion of the sword and consists of three basic parts: the crossguard, the grip or handle, and the pommel. Okay, we'll start at this end. The crossguard is there to protect your hand, obviously, and is made of two elements on either side, and these are known as quillons. Okay, one quillon, two quillon. Comes from the French word quillon, and I'm sure all our French viewers will correct my pronunciation again, which you're welcome to do. And it's made of two quillons. The expression quillon, and lots of English people annoyingly say quillion. It is not quillion, it's quillon, or quillon. And the expression quillon didn't really come into use until I think the 16th, 17th century. It was not a medieval expression as far as I'm aware, as far as I've seen in sources. This is simply known as the guard, as one unit. Next we come up to the grip. There's various types of grip. The long sword often has some kind of band or swelling in the middle there to stop, if you're using the sword one-handed, to stop your hand sliding sort of down it as you're swinging the sword. And then the pommel. And the pommel serves two main purposes. One, of course, to stop your hand slipping off the end, and two, it serves as a counterbalance to the blade. Okay. However, one thing I will add, and I've mentioned this in other videos, the pommel is often on a medieval sword not as heavy as people think it is, by virtue of the fact that many of the original ones are partially or entirely hollow. Okay, and you do get even big spherical pommels that actually are almost completely hollow. Why did they make a very big pommel and make it hollow? Well, we don't know exactly. Maybe they just liked the look of it. They liked to have the look of a big pommel. Maybe it implied that their sword was more powerful or bigger than it was, or who knows. So the blade. So we've looked at the hilt now. Now to look at the blade. The blade consists of two flats. These are known as the flats, and these are the edges. Okay, the inside and outside flat would be dependent on which way you're holding the sword. In fencing, the outside is the side that your weapon arm is, and your inside is the side to your chest. So if I was standing sideways on, this is my outside, this is my inside. The same goes with the flats. We have here an outside flat and here an inside flat. Now with a medieval sword it is symmetrical. So in actual fact it just depends on which way around I hold the sword as to which is the inside and which is the outside. However, not all swords are symmetrical. For example, many sabres and rapiers and other types of swords are asymmetrical and therefore do have a specific outside and inside flat. The edges. Again, here we have a front edge known as a true edge and a back edge known as a false edge. Okay, you can just say front edge, back edge, as as I do and many other people do, or you can additionally say, or alternatively say, true edge and false edge. And these are expressions that were used in medieval and Renaissance fencing treatises to refer to which edge. They would sometimes say true edge or sometimes front edge. So they're both perfectly applicable. The false edge on this type of sword is the entire length of the blade. However, some types of sword, the false edge, if it's a single edge type of sword, so let's grab, here we go, just grabbing a sabre. Here we have a sabre, single edge, so this has clearly a front edge or true edge, and it has a false edge, but only here, for the last sort of 10 to 12 inches of the blade. Okay, and in Turkish this would be called a yelman. Okay, so some swords have, if you look at a medieval European mesa or falchion, they sometimes have a false edge, but just up at this clipped point up here. Okay, so true edge is the front, false edge is the back. Again, going back to the medieval sword, that is only decided by which way round you hold the sword, but that's because this is a symmetrical sword. If it was an asymmetrical sword, because it was curved or single-edged, or it had a guard that had to be held a certain way round, then I would have a dedicated front and back edge. Okay. Now, on the flats of the blade, we also have a fuller. This is the groove for essentially lightening the blade, and you'll notice in the upper portions of the blade here it becomes diamond section, and this is known as sometimes known as a mid-rib, where essentially lots of swords now, essentially where the two planes of the edge meet at the top here, they form a ridge along the top there, and that's sometimes known as a mid-rib, particularly with swords that are what is called hollow ground. Hollow ground means instead of having flat planes from the mid-rib to the edge, they're actually inwards curving. Okay, they're concave, and when they're concave, this raised bit in the centre becomes a more definitive rib, and that's known as a mid-rib. Okay. There are three portions to the blade. There is the fort, which is the bottom of the blade, nearest to your hand. Fort, of course, means strong. It's sometimes just known as strong, so strong or fort, because it's nearest to your hand, so you have the strongest resistance to pushing or pressure there. This is known as the medium, the middle of the blade, and this is known as the weak or foible, and foible just means weak, feeble. Okay, this is obviously, it's known as feeble or weak because that's the point at which you have the least resistance against pressure against it, and usually you cut and thrust with different portions of the foible or weak of the blade. Okay, right. Moving on to sabres, and I'm just using sabres because this covers some of the other names of parts that we often cover in swords on this channel. So here we have a fairly typical Napoleonic or slightly after Napoleonic era sabre. I've already talked about the blade. This blade has a fuller, and in fact it has a sort of a second set of fullers as well. A single true edge, a short false edge, a point, which is the foible, the medium, the strong, the fort, okay, and now the hilt. So this one has a pommel. On certain types of sabre and other types of sword, the pommel might not necessarily be a counterweight, it may simply be there to stop your hand sliding off the end of the sword. Okay, so the pommel can just be a swelling, or it can be a counterbalance weight. This is called a knuckle bow, and the knuckle bow forms part of the guard as a whole. Okay, the back is known as a quillon because, again, just like with the medieval sword, this is a remnant of that. This is the rear quillon, and that is the front quillon, and this part, as I said, is the knuckle bow. The entire bottom, as I said, is the hilt. On a sabre, you also often have what's known as a back strap, and the back strap is the piece of metal that comes from the pommel down to meet the guard at the back there and binds the whole hilt together. I will look at other types of swords such as side sword and rapier in another video, but hopefully that's given you some of the terminology if you didn't already know it. Thank you.